Hello everybody, welcome back to Punk Ride. My name is Smee. I've often had my students ask me, what is the difference between literature and the genre of fiction? If you're writing fiction stories, isn't it categorically a piece of literature? And there's a lot of discussion on this issue, and the ambiguities are sometimes difficult to grapple with, but the answer is definitively, hell no! Fiction is a great story. Literature is a great experience. It's the difference between dropping in on a mini ramp and the McTwist on the animal chin ramp. In fiction, nothing is real. It's a good lie. But literature tells truths. Fiction is good, clear structure, while literature often redefines technique. Style in fiction is about correct grammar, where literature might create its own and never interrupt. Fiction is about great character, whereas literature makes you question your own. Stick around on this episode of Punk Ride, and we'll take a look at a few of the elements that distinguish literature from other types of fiction writing. To reduce it a bit, there are two major aspects that differentiate fiction from literature and sets one apart from the other. That is theme and style, of which Jose Saramago is a master of both. This is a little bit difficult to pinpoint, as I believe there is a subtle tipping point where in a piece of work, the theme becomes so compelling, it becomes the seducer that touches our humanity in some ways. And when this drives the story more than the plot devices used to move it along, then you know that you are dealing with a piece of literature. Years ago, I had the special privilege of meeting Jose Saramago. He spoke at the opening of Villa Grimaldi Memorial Park in the comuna of Peñalolén in Santiago, Chile. This place, during the Pinochet dictatorial regime from 1974 to 1978, had been transformed into a place of interrogation and torture for the DINA, which was the Chilean secret police. And Jose Saramago came to inaugurate the park. His presence was the important part. Why him? Why did he come? Why did they invite him? And what does he say in his books that makes him such a desirable figure to have in an event like that? Afterwards, I stood in line and I shook his hand and I said a few banal words. Two foreigners, a Portuguese and American, in a foreign land of Chile, who were at a very sacred place to commemorate events that neither happened to us or anyone that we knew, yet we were still intrinsically connected through our very humanity. This is also literature, and this is why you should read Jose Saramago. The second part is what literature does with language and style. I believe that oftentimes good literature is lost on the young reader, in part because of the inexperience of language itself. Perhaps this is one of the reasons that it's more difficult to engage with a more complex text. With Saramago, the subtlety of language and the uniqueness of style can be so cleanly interwoven into the flow of the story that the reader doesn't even recognize it exists in the writing. The true gift of these authors, people like Saramago, people like Coetzee, people like Hemingway, it's the magic of the mastery of the literature of the craft. The craft is not necessarily about plot constructions and twists, although those are in there, but it's about the invisibility of what they do. The curtain that they've lifted, and the young reader might come back and say, oh wow, what a great story. But the wise reader will say, holy shit, look at what this author has done to me. Look where he's touched me. This is literature at its finest. The skill and gift of Jose Saramago is his ability to change direction and feeling of a story in a single sentence. Few authors do this as well as he does. And once this happens, you know that there is an impending doom, and the inevitable march towards its end is the only trajectory for the story. Take a look at a couple of these examples right here. And in these examples, I want you to notice two aspects. Number one, the use of grammatical language and what he does with that language, but also how he constructs the sentence to have a powerful essence to the sentence. A little background to this story. Here we have a political power who is having an internal conversation with one of his cohorts, and he is describing how he uses his influence to show his way and influence the people who are, as he considers, the lay people or the commoner. The minds of human beings are not always entirely at one with the world in which they live. Some people have trouble adjusting to reality. Basically, they're just weak, confused spirits who use words, sometimes very skillfully, to justify their cowardice. That is a philosophical statement, and one of the talents that Saramago had was to be able to insert these in the middle of either his dialogues or his narrative to be able to force a point of introspection for the reader. And careful now, moral confusion, because I'm assuming your confusion is moral, is the first step along the path to disquiet. And after that, as you yourselves are so fond of saying, anything can happen. The themes of moral compromise are an essence of both of these books. The story that drives the literary piece is just a facade for its meaning. The real meaning lies in the reader's interpretation of the work. This is the intangible and the symbolic. This is what makes it literature. Literature is a symbolic representation of an idea that somehow gets at the core of our humanity. It's important to engage and think about literature because this is, in and of itself, a learned skill. The reader has to learn how to participate and invest himself into the work. For interpretation of symbolic literature is not only a human quality, it also fosters the ability for social critique. And this is the beauty of literature. Our brains work in symbolic representation. Even when it works in coded syntactic language, like reading a book, what enters our brain is not necessarily registered as language like we see it on the page. It's transformed and computed into an internal language that is specific to our brains. The well-known linguist Steven Pinker calls this phenomenon mentalese. It's a special talent that our brain has so that it understands itself. It's absolutely freaking amazing that we can do this. I know the vast majority of YouTube channels that I've checked out anyways, they deal with young adult and general fiction writing, and this is great. It's totally entertaining, it's fun to read and write. I even write it myself. But you can't ignore something that has some meaning. It's like a civic duty. It's a social responsibility. It's a human responsibility for everybody who reads to incorporate a little bit of literature into your reading routine. In general, reading helps creativity. It helps with thinking and imagination. But reading literature also builds social consciousness. Now, I wonder if Jose Saramago had been around to watch this whole Trump spectacle, what he might say about all of this. I'll tell you what he says, because it's right in here. The gratuitous internal power plays, it's in there. The victimization of the layperson, it's in there. The ungraciousness of politics, it's in there. The gratuitous internal power plays, it's in there. Even this no police zone that came up in Seattle last month, it's in here. These books were written nearly 2 decades ago, but the elements that you find inside are timeless, and that is how you know that it's good literature. So thanks for joining us, and until next time, remember, keep on reading, keep on writing. You do not need permission, just write. Punk write.